Good morning, Dr. Mara.
Hello, and welcome. We are at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. As we usually mention, we are streaming live on YouTube. So if you subscribe to our channel, you can definitely follow up every time we post a webinar or anything that's newsworthy. So today we're going to cover when conflict happens, and we are going to narrow down the common manager mistakes and how we occasionally make things worse as managers. So let's go ahead. Let's dive in on this very warm California Thursday. Let's give it a go. Here we go. So before we get started, we always like to share a little bit about who we are. So Management Cues is a neuroscience-backed training company that provides information as our participants are learning. So we provide insight into real gaps, how you're learning, if you're learning at all, if it's benefiting you. And so measuring impact in real time is one of our unique contributions in the learning environment. And so that's what we do. That's what we focus on is the manager's learning experience and what's actually happening to them, for them, around them, and capturing that as we learn. So, if you haven't met me before, I'm Dr. Mayra Austin. I'm the CEO and founder of Management Cues, and quite curious and passionate about the experiences that we have in the workforce. That's what led me to launch a company like Management Cues and focus in on the experience. With that said, let's go ahead. Let's dive in. So, today we're going to focus on conflict. Conflict is something that comes up quite a bit with our clients. It's an opportunity, but can feel awkward, can be uncomfortable. And so, we're going to touch on some of the reasons why that is. So, we're going to focus on understanding workplace conflict, the manager's role within it, and we have a role to play, a designated functional role to play as managers when conflict takes place in the environment. We're going to touch on some of the common manager mistakes that are just they happen really kind of fluidly in environments unless we have disciplined against it and have trained and educated ourselves around conflict. We're going to talk about a healthy conflict resolution framework. It's super simple. It's a framework that I've used for a long time and I share with our facilitators and our clients as well on a go forward basis so that it's not as intimidating and not as awkward. And then we'll end on becoming a conflict competent manager because it's a very necessary skill. Where there is people, there will be conflict, and then we'll close it out with some Q&A. So let's dive in. So one of the very first things that I like to touch on when I'm training around conflict is that conflict is a very natural thing. As leaders, as managers, it should be an expected thing, not something that we push away from, not something that we are surprised by. It is the outcome, actually, of people working together. As people, we have differences across multiple levels, right? Difference of opinion, difference of experience, difference in training. We can go on and on. And so the goal of management and leadership, it shouldn't be to eliminate conflict, but to manage through it, right? Because the expectation of completely eliminating conflict or conflict not being present isn't realistic. It's, we're working against nature, in other words, when we don't really understand that conflict is supposed to happen and we're supposed to know how to get people through it. So the reality of workplace conflict is is that there are a lot of misconceptions out there. And in the workplace, as we're trying to lead, as we're trying to perform, as we're trying to produce and maybe succeed, conflict can feel personal and it can feel like maybe we're failing. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to say that you're not failing. Conflict is not a sign of failure. What it's actually a sign of is that people are moving through certain instances, right? So they're having different experiences. They're seeing problems differently. They have competing priorities, perhaps. Maybe they care about certain outcomes more than others. Maybe they're working under a lot of pressure. And so these are very natural things that end up in conflict in the workplace. And healthy environments experience conflict. So it's actually an indicator that people are stepping out and expressing themselves. It's an interesting dynamic because sometimes we think when there's no noise, there's no conflict. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes there's no noise because the environment is so unsafe that people don't care to engage anymore. And so, as leaders and managers, you have to be careful and understand what to look for, which we will touch on today. But healthy leaders, effective leaders, understand and expect conflict and know how to navigate through it. So it's the navigating through it that I have experienced in our field of work and as a manager moving through different stages in my career. That's where people get stuck, and that's where it becomes frustrating, unpleasant, confusing, is how to navigate through it in a way that lends to our objectives, right? So that's kind of where it happens. So why does conflict happen to begin with? So again, it's a really natural thing. Poor communication is one reason, unclear expectations is another. Limited resources where we're producing or focusing on projects that we really don't have the resources to support around. That creates a layer of conflict as people have to compete for existing resources. Different personalities and work styles, we really do have to take the time to get to know our people, how they work, how to maximize them, what's important to them. And when we don't, we run into conflict. Organizational change, if our companies, our organizations are going through a massive shift, incredible growth, which is a great problem to have, or we're just changing leadership teams, we're promoting and bringing in new people, that will create conflict, and we should expect it, right? So managers influence every one of these things, and so they play the role of the gatekeeper when these things are happening, and when they don't know how to navigate, it enhances that conflict, right? And then it can turn into other more difficult things to correct. So, for this reason, it's important for us in management roles and in leadership roles to understand our role within conflict. What are we supposed to do? Who are we supposed to be when there is conflict? So, managers don't just resolve conflict. They're not there to be the person with all the answers. And maybe that is a false expectation that we have of managers and leaders. And maybe that's the start of the mind shift. So managers are supposed to help shape it and provide direction through it. So one of the greatest misconceptions about conflict is that managers are responsible for solving people's problems. So let me do a quick fact check and say that that's not the case, right? The role of a leader and a manager is really to be a facilitator within it so that people become independent and are functional. So in reality, effective managers create the conditions where people can resolve conflict constructively while maintaining accountability, trust, and performance. And so it's a very different thing than just handing a problem to the manager and saying, "You're a manager, you should fix this." And I think that sometimes that happens, and what we do is that we create a bottleneck, which is now the manager, right? And so we have to be careful with our expectations and our understanding of the function of a role. A manager's role is not to eliminate conflict. It's to show the capacity to lead through it. And that's what we need to help managers with, that mind shift, enough understanding and knowledge to walk people through the conflict and feel confident that this is part of what they're supposed to do. So there are some common mistakes that I have witnessed, trained on, consulted against, you name it. I've pretty much have done it when it comes to conflict. Personally, I actually enjoy learning around conflict, taking on conflict, and coming through with a constructive outcome. And so avoiding the conversation. So several clients that we do training with, we end up seeing that part of why they can't successfully move to the next step of whatever topic they're training on, whether it's actually managing effectively, whether it's delegation, you name it. Avoiding a tough conversation gets in their way and in the way of everybody else's progress. And so that is a common mistake when you're trying to resolve conflict or manage it or navigate through it. Taking sides too quickly, reacting emotionally instead of leading intentionally. Again, when we make workplace conflict personal, it's difficult to help people lead through it. And I recently had a really great conversation with a team member, and I challenged her and I said, are you right now in the role that you're in? Are you part of the conflict or are you guiding your people through it? And so she had to sit and reflect on that a little bit and decide and be honest with herself as to whether she had fallen into the trap of being part of the conflict because of how she felt, right? And so we have to take these moments to step away. So focusing on blame instead of solutions, waiting too long to address an issue, making assumptions instead of asking questions. Curiosity is one of the best tools a manager and leader can use in anything that happens, whether positive or negative. Being curious about the why instead of making assumptions, blaming, pointing fingers, that kind of thing is really unproductive. Ignoring the root cause, allowing psychological safety to deteriorate. Okay, I'm not gonna be able to say it. Deteriorate. Okay, I don't think I got that right, but you get what I'm saying. Becoming the referee instead of the coach, inconsistent conflict management, and failing to clarify expectations. And last but certainly not least, treating conflict as a people problem instead of a systems problem, right? So it's easy to blame the people in front of us and think they're difficult. They don't know what they're doing. They're inexperienced, right? We as a society love to put labels on things. It makes it easy for us to not be accountable. And so part of the work that we do at Management Cues is we collect data as we're learning so that we don't run into the trap of making assumptions about why somebody can't exercise a certain area successfully. And a lot of the times the reporting points to a trend, to a bottleneck, to a point of weakness that exists in the environment that is holding people back. And so, again, getting curious takes us a long way. So let's take a deeper dive. Let's understand our missteps and what it looks like in practice in a real world live setting, right? Because sometimes it's easy to hear it, but if you can't connect it back to something you see every day, you might not be able to correct it because it feels natural, because it's an environmental norm, because you didn't know any better, right? Maybe this is a new thing where you shift conflict from a negative to a positive. So let's break it down. Let's take a look. So when we talk about avoiding a conversation, right? What does that look like in the workforce? So in the workforce, many managers hope that the issue will resolve itself. If we're avoidant, that's kind of the mentality around it is, I just hope it goes away, right? It's not that big of a deal, or you excuse it and, argue it away in your head. Instead, what happens is that unresolved conflict has a direct consequence, and it often grows into things like resentment, gossip, reduced collaboration, lower engagement, and turnover. So, in reality, avoiding a conversation costs a lot more time and energy than having it to begin with. And so, doing that kind of mental shift math is an important thing for managers. Taking sides too quickly. So sometimes we feel like because we've observed a person act a certain way for a long time, that we know exactly what happens, right? And so that sort of default assumption making really pulls away from the function and the role of the manager. So managers sometimes make decisions before hearing every perspective. And what this does is it creates in the environment perceptions of favoritism. It allows for a loss of trust. It creates defensiveness. So it enhances the conflict because people feel these things once they experience it, and it's difficult to untangle it. There's a reduced psychological safety that takes place when we just side too quickly and don't do the labor of really making sure we captured everything. So reacting emotionally instead of leading intentionally. So conflict can activate a manager's own stress response, leading to a few things. So it could lead to raising your voices, to defensive communication, to impulsive decision making, and escalation, right? Something that was a disagreement could turn into a full-blown legal conflict, a physical fight, right? A verbal fight, because you, in essence, light that match. So employees will often mirror the emotional tone that is set by the leader. And so being intentional is recognizing how you're feeling in the moment, and goes back to that question that I asked my colleague, right? Are you in it or are you leading them through it? And you have to stop and pause to think about that, because the reality is we're human, we have feelings too, and we might get caught up in that. And so you have to discipline yourself enough to know when to step away and focus on creating that mental separation. Focusing on blame instead of solutions. So questions like who's responsible, who started it. So sometimes we say that. I know I've said that to my kids. We have to remember that in the workplace, our team members, our employees, they're not our children. And we have to be a little bit more disciplined about how we address what is happening. So questions like these automatically shut down productive dialogue, right? So even the design of the question, the intention of the question needs to be a little bit more strategic if the intention is to resolve. So better questions are questions that are a little bit less targeted, right? So what happened? What contributed to this? What solution moves us forward? It takes it away from the individual so that it doesn't feel like a personal attack, right? And it doesn't position team members to point fingers, but to focus on the facts. And so slight changes like this go a very long way for managers, and it's giving them cues, right? Cues on how to act, how to step into a situation. Waiting too long to address the issue. So small disagreements become larger organizational problems when they're left unaddressed. And so some of the things that we have to look at is, are we getting in our own way? Delays often lead to polarization, increased assumptions, loss of trust, and emotional exhaustion. And so these things we kind of do to ourselves when we make the decision to wait or hope that it goes away or avoid something completely. And so it's important for us to really reconcile the actions that we take as conflict is happening. Making assumptions instead of asking questions. So managers sometimes assume that they know people's intentions, that they know the person's motivations, that they understand the person's emotions, that they understand the level of commitment. But the reality is that we need to leave it to the person to let us know what those things are. And that requires discipline, right? Because we have perception, we have bias, we have all these things that are naturally wired in our brain, and we have to discipline against in order to be objective. Assumptions will always fuel misunderstanding. So I always tell people in conversation, please don't ever make a decision on my behalf. Let me answer the question. Let me decline. Let me say yes. Let me disagree. Give me the opportunity to do those things. Don't assume that you know what I would say at any given moment, right? And this, of course, is in more fluid dialogue, but I want you to think about that and put it into perspective. Don't take a person's right to speak for themselves away, right? Because that's what we do with assumptions. Ignoring the root cause. So surface issues are rarely the actual issue, right? So examples of that in the workplace, a poor attitude might actually be unclear expectations and somebody who is very frustrated. Resistance might be fear of change, right? Maybe the change we're pushing through isn't clear enough. Maybe the why hasn't been explained. And so people respond in a very natural way. And to us, it feels like rejection, resistance, bad attitude, right? But that's not necessarily what may be happening underneath. Communication problems may be role ambiguity. It may be that people don't understand who they're supposed to be in that moment, right? And what they're supposed to do. And so these are the things that I have found in my experience. in managing and navigating through conflict really make the difference and get the outcome that the organization needs or that I really want to move forward. And so again, being a little strategic goes a long way with conflict, and understanding human beings and keeping it human centered makes all the difference. So allowing psychological safety to deteriorate. I said it. I did it. Managers unintentionally reduced psychological safety when they interrupt often, which that is something I have continued to discipline. As a direct dominant style communicator, I know that for me, I have to consciously think, don't interrupt, don't interrupt. And so getting to know ourselves as managers and leaders is an important part too. Dismissing concerns, it may not be important to you, but if it's important to them, it's worth addressing and pausing and understanding, right? And being curious about it. Publicly criticizing employees always activates people defensively. Punishing disagreement. Disagreement should be welcomed. It should just be respectful. And there's a difference, right? It's okay to disagree. You want people to disagree with you as managers and leaders. That means the environment is safe. You don't have to necessarily move forward with what they're saying. You just have to respect their position, right? And there's a difference there. So avoiding difficult conversations, again, is such a psychologically heavy thing. And I see it all the time across environments. And I don't think we realize the impact that it has and how much harder it makes management and leadership when we do it. Employees stop speaking up long before they stop caring, right? So people quieting it down, not participating in meetings, not challenging you, not asking questions, not openly disagreeing, that is a sign of an absence of safety because they can't be themselves and they can't bring their ideas and what their process is forward. And that is a deficit. So becoming the referee instead of the coach. So conflict again is charged. So we have to really step outside of it to lead people through it. And that is a discipline. So some managers solve every disagreement themselves because they think, I don't want to deal with it. I'm just going to take care of it. They don't know what they're doing. Whatever you tell yourself, whatever narrative you create, it actually creates an absence of autonomy and independence in your team. You're not showing them how to do it, and they're not going to get any better, which means that you become the permanent babysitter. And that is not what we want to do as leaders and managers. We want them to leave the nest. We want them to be independent. We want them to know how to solve conflict on a go forward basis. So what this creates is employee dependency, a reduced accountability, and limited conflict resolution skills. And so again, definition around the role that we play as managers and leaders is everything. It literally is the ultimate mind shift. So inconsistent conflict management, right? We resolve the same issue different ways with different people. That is terrible for culture. So when similar situations receive different responses, you're sending a very clear message. And the message that you're sending is bias, unfairness, favoritism, and a lack of integrity. Consistency is not only what builds trust, but it also builds culture. It defines who we are. This is how we handle this because this is our understanding of it, and this is what it means to who we are. And so for us to be consistent in how we handle conflict in an organization, all of our managers should be trained the same way to understand issues to the same degree, right? And I think that that's an opportunity for a lot of organizations out there. Failing to clarify expectations. So many conflicts begin because people have different assumptions about roles, responsibilities, priorities, decision authority, and communication norms. So expectations, to me, are something you have to carefully design and set in a workplace environment. And you set it in a lot of different ways. You set it through policy, through protocol, through practice, through training, through reinforcement of professional development. All of those things together really create clear expectations for people as to how to behave in the environment. And so inconsistencies there confuse people. Treating conflict as a people problem instead of a systems problem, that is something that comes up frequently. Sometimes it is a person that is not a good fit, that maybe doesn't belong in that role, that maybe isn't going to grow. But I think that most of the time, what I see is the opposite. Most of the time, I see disparities within the environment. So managers often focus on personalities. Oh, he's just loud. He's just lazy. He just doesn't care, right? Those are examples of people focusing on personalities. In reality, conflict may be driven by more meaningful things like competing priorities, limited resources, poor processes, organizational change, or misaligned incentives. And so these things are living in the environment, holding people back, but we are busy pointing the finger. And I think that as managers and leaders, we have to know how to assess these things, how to audit for them, and how to have the right conversations. So let's talk about a healthy resolution, right? A competent manager, an efficient manager really understands first their role within it. So they know, okay, I got to lead these people through it. They don't take it personal and they think, okay, these are the steps I'm going to take. So a framework is very helpful to have for you to feel that confident, that positive about conflict taking place in front of you. Right. And so this is a framework that is super easy. We call it the manager's conflict framework. And so when we're training on conflict and we get really specific with our groups, with our participants and clients, we take a look at what's happening specifically in their environment, but we start with very basic fundamental ways of looking at a problem. You don't have to be super sophisticated or fancy. It's really following the flow that's going to benefit a healthy resolution. And so when conflict occurs, effective managers move through 5 leadership questions, right? Because you're leading people through. So some of the questions you should be asking, and in this order, what happened, right? Just have people write down the facts, separate it from emotion. What is each person experience? How is each person experiencing this, right? That allows you to take in the perspective. Perspective is not fact, but it is important to that person. And so capturing it is important for us in order to resolve things in a healthy way. What needs are not being met, right? Let's understand what the holdup is, what the setback is, what the problem is. What solution supports both accountability and trust? So this is where you dive into the problem solving of it. How do you create a win-win situation here with what you know and what you have? What can we learn to prevent this in the future? How do you make sure this doesn't become a recurring bottleneck, right? And that's the focus on continuous improvement. And this is typically where you find out if it's an actual person problem or people problem, or if it's an environment problem. And there's something that's constantly triggering in your environment for us to have these issues, right? And that's how we kind of deal with conflict in a more productive way and separate ourselves from taking it personal, from making it a people problem, from not understanding that there's an underlying problem that we actually need to solve for in the environment. Okay, so here's our key takeaway for today, short and sweet for today's conflict webinar. Conflict is not simply an interpersonal issue. It is a reflection of leadership, communication, and organizational systems. The manager's role is, in fact, to recognize conflict early, to create psychological safety, to stay objective, to regulate emotions, to facilitate productive dialogue, to clarify expectations, and coach employees toward resolution, and definitely hold people accountable. Strengthening the team through learning means we're actually moving through the conflict, not away from it. So those are some of the key takeaways for today. And, I think that it's really important to keep in mind that we shouldn't reject conflict, we should invite it in. So with that said, I'll go ahead and open it up to any comments, questions, or feedback. I'll take a look in chat if anybody has any questions that you'd like to enter there before I move with our close today. And I'll take a look also on YouTube to see if there are any questions for our people watching our stream. Okay, I think we're okay. Let me see if there's anything here in chat that we need to take a look at. And it looks like we're okay. So I'll go ahead and move towards our close for today. All right. So As always, we like to share with you, we have tons of resources around management. I think we're training now on over 31 topics in the management and leadership space. So with your registration, you'll get a copy of the session recording, you'll get a copy of the webinar, and we provide you with these links to additional resources. Training programs are available that you can sign up for. We also include a link to our management planner, which walks managers through the functions of management and leadership and a lot of what we talked about today. You can also check out our neuroscience studies, which kind of show our neuroscience proven approach and our actual scientific experiment that we did and study. You can schedule a consultation with me if you'd like to chat with me about your pain points and maybe challenges you're having in the workforce, either as an individual manager, as a group, or as an organization, whichever is a good fit for you. And of course, last but not least, we have management membership programs that allow you to have support all year round for an incredible subscription price. So check that out if you're interested. And we're also promoting our Growth Codex Journal, which is I think about $11, but $2.50 of it is donated to the Opportunity Engine, which is EXP, the Opportunity Engine, that provides youth and career opportunities to young people out there to expose them to opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. So with that said, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate us spending our time together today. Reach out if you have any questions.